All right, so ready to take a deep dive into weight loss?
Always a hot topic, right?
For sure. But this time, we're going straight to the source. Think doctors, medical institutions,
Yeah.
the real experts.
Cutting through all the noise and the fads.
Exactly. We've got articles from places like UCSF and Kaiser Permanente, tips straight from doctors, even a YouTube video from a family physician who specializes in obesity medicine. So we're covering all the bases here, practical advice, different perspectives.
Yeah, it's interesting actually how much emphasis there is on building those sustainable habits, not just quick fixes.
Right. That's what really stood out to me too, especially what the psychiatrist was saying. Like, she talked about how drastically cutting calories can actually backfire.
Oh, yeah.
It can lead to, binge eating. Like our bodies just rebel against that kind of deprivation.
Makes sense. And the YouTube doctor, he talked about that too. Warned against those crash diets that are, almost impossible to stick with.
So true. It really does seem like slow and steady wins the race.
For sure. And it makes you wonder about all those lose 10 pounds in a week promises, doesn't it?
Totally. But it goes beyond just debunking those quick fixes. Both these doctors, they both highlighted something really important, that weight loss isn't just about the number on the scale.
Absolutely. I mean, we do tend to get so fixated on that number, but...
But the YouTube doctor, he was really good about pointing out how real weight stigma is and how important it is to find a doctor who, supports you without judgment,
Completely. It's about feeling comfortable with your healthcare, feeling empowered.
Exactly. It's about having a doctor who's on your team, really. Yeah. Oh, and speaking of feeling comfortable, did you catch that part where the doctor in the video sort of challenged that whole BMI thing?
Yeah. It's not the only indicator of health.
Right. There's so much more to it than that.
Definitely. So much more to consider. And while we're on the topic of things to consider, let's talk about food. What to eat, what to limit.
Right. Because there was a lot of agreement there across the sources.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like processed foods, sugary drinks.
The usual suspect.
Totally. But the UCSF article, they got pretty specific, like pastries, donuts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sugary cereals, even full-fat dairy.
Interesting.
And they called out high-fat meats, too, like bacon and sausage. It's a good reminder that even things we think of as staples might need a closer look.
Definitely makes you think.
So we've talked about what to limit. What about what to focus on?
Well, whole foods were definitely front and center. Lots of fruits and veggies, lean protein.
For building blocks.
Exactly. But here's what I loved. The YouTube doctor, she actually gave us permission to enjoy our favorite foods, in moderation, of course.
Oh, I like that part.
Right. It's not about total deprivation. It's about making, conscious choices. Because she explained how deprivation can actually backfire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you deny yourself everything you enjoy, it can just lead to binging later on.
I've totally been there.
Haven't we all?
So finding that balance is key. Speaking of balance, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about forming those healthy habits. That's something the psychiatrist really emphasized.
Oh, yeah. What did she say?
Well, she pointed out that motivation comes and goes. So you can't just rely on willpower. It's about creating habits, routines.
Oh, I see.
And she said it takes 4 to 6 weeks to really form a new habit.
Wow, that's good to know.
Right. It's all about consistency over time. Instead of trying to change everything overnight, what if you started with just 5 minutes of exercise a day?
5 minutes?
It feels so much more achievable, doesn't it?
It does.
And the YouTube doctor, she talked about celebrating small victories, not just weight loss milestones, but any positive change.
So important.
It is. It's about acknowledging progress, however small.
Absolutely.
Oh, and speaking of things that we sometimes forget about, what about sleep? And stress management? They play a role too, right?
Big time. The psychiatrist talked about the impact of cortisol, the stress hormone.
Oh, right.
She said if cortisol levels are chronically high, it can actually lead to increased fat storage, especially around the midsection.
Oh, no.
I know. And have you ever noticed how you crave more food when you're sleep deprived?
Oh, totally.
The YouTube doctor explained how lack of sleep messes with hormones like ghrelin. That's the one that regulates hunger. And, you guessed it, cortisol.
It's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. So prioritizing sleep and managing stress, they're essential.
Totally connected. Now, one last thing that really resonated from the YouTube doctor was about having a support system. It's easy to feel like you're in this alone.
Oh, for sure.
But surrounding yourself with people who understand, who encourage you,
It can make a world of difference.
it really can.
Yeah.
Makes you think about who you can rely on during your own journey. Could be friends, family, even online communities.
Right, finding your tribe.
Exactly. People who uplift and support you.
And it's so important to remember that everyone's journey is different.
Oh, absolutely.
What works for one person might not work for another. Finding what's sustainable for you, that's key.
So true. All right, so to recap this first part of our deep dive, we've learned that weight loss is about so much more than just restrictive diets and quick fixes.
So much more.
It's about building sustainable habits, having a supportive doctor, and, finding joy in food without deprivation.
And managing stress, getting enough sleep,
All of it.
it's a whole body approach.
It really is. And before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, think about this. How do you define success on your own weight loss journey? Is it just about the scale, or are there other things that matter more?
That's a great question to think about.
Right.
What does success really look like?
And speaking of things to consider, one of the sources, an article on WebMD, had some interesting advice on talking to doctors.
Like a cheat sheet for understanding doctor speak.
Exactly. For instance, they often tell patients to, get down to a healthy weight, but what does that actually mean?
Right, like are we talking about fitting into those old jeans or...
Exactly. The article pointed out that while we might be thinking about looks, doctors are more focused on reducing the risk of those serious health conditions.
like diabetes, heart disease?
Yeah, all that stuff. It's a good reminder that health is about more than just how we look.
Definitely. And the article also pointed out how the number on the scale doesn't always tell the whole story. They said BMI is often a better measure.
Oh, right, because it takes height into account.
Exactly. But even BMI isn't perfect.
Because?
It doesn't account for things like muscle mass or where that fat is located.
I see.
And that's where waist circumference comes in. They recommend a waist size of 35 inches or less for women and 40 or less for men.
Got it. So it's about getting a more complete picture of our health rather than just relying on one number.
Exactly, looking at the bigger picture.
Makes sense. And speaking of specifics, another common piece of advice from doctors is to lose 1 to 2 pounds a week. How do we actually do that, though?
Well, the WebMD article broke it down. They reminded us that 1 pound of fat equals 3,500 calories. So to lose a pound a week, you need to create a deficit of about 500 calories per day.
So, like eating less, exercising more.
Exactly. And they gave some really practical examples like swapping chips for an apple,
Boy, I like that.
choosing a smaller coffee drink, or skipping the cheese on your sandwich. Little things.
Right. Small changes can make a difference.
Totally. They even suggested adding a 25-minute walk to your day.
Just to burn some extra calories.
Yep, it's about making those small, conscious changes that add up.
It's like those little things you don't even think about.
Yeah.
And it seems like every doctor out there says to cut back on junk food.
Yeah, that's a given. Right.
But we all know what junk food is. The chips, the candy.
Right. But the WebMD article challenged us to think beyond those obvious culprits. It's more about being mindful of any food that's low in nutrition and high in calories.
Oh, I see.
Even seemingly harmless things like sugary sauces or gravies,
Oh, sneaky.
they can be calorie bombs. Their point was to focus on eating nutrient-dense foods, stuff that actually nourishes our bodies.
Right. But good news is, they didn't say we have to give up all the good stuff.
Oh, good.
It's about being mindful of portion sizes and how often we indulge.
Makes sense. Like baking chicken instead of frying it, swapping soda for sparkling water.
Or loading up your pizza with veggies instead of meat.
Exactly. There are always healthier alternatives that still taste good.
Those are great tips. It's about finding ways to enjoy those favorite foods without, going overboard.
Right.
And speaking of healthy choices, a lot of sources emphasized whole grains. Do you remember what they said about refined grains versus whole grains?
Oh, yeah. They explained how refined grains, like white bread, have had those nutrient-rich outer layers removed.
Oh, right.
So you're basically getting empty carbs.
Whereas whole grains like whole wheat or brown rice, they still have those outer layers,
Yeah,
which are full of fiber.
exactly. And that fiber keeps you feeling full, which is great when you're trying to, manage those calories.
Makes sense.
They even suggested aiming for at least 3 ounces of whole grains every day. And they had a great tip. Look for 100% whole grains on the label.
Takes the guesswork out of it. So helpful. Now, we can't talk about weight loss without talking about exercise. What stood out to you from the sources?
The WebMD article really emphasized creating that calorie deficit through exercise, in addition to the diet changes, of course.
Got it.
They recommended at least 60 minutes a day of moderate activity, or 300 minutes a week.
Wow, that's a lot.
But the good news is you can break it up throughout the day.
Oh, that's good. So like 3 10-minute walks would count.
Exactly.
Much more manageable.
And they also recommended strength training at least twice a week to help build muscle.
Makes sense.
Because stronger muscles burn more calories even when you're resting.
It's a win-win.
It is.
But, of course, always check with your doctor before starting any new exercise program, especially if you have any health conditions. Safety first.
One thing that really stuck with me from one of the YouTube videos was the reminder that the weight loss journey isn't always like a straight line.
Oh, yeah.
There will be setbacks. She was so reassuring about that. She said it's normal to have those bumps in the road.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And she encouraged viewers to just pick themselves up and start fresh the next day. It's such a great message of self-compassion.
It is. Because it's easy to get discouraged.
Totally. But it's important to remember those setbacks are normal. They happen.
Absolutely.
And something else that stood out from that video was the focus on those, what did she call them? Non-scale victories.
Oh, yeah,
It's a good reminder that weight loss is about more than just the number on the scale.
for sure.
She talked about celebrating things like how your clothes fit, having more energy, better sleep,
Oh, I like that.
even small improvements in blood pressure. It's about noticing the positive changes that are happening, even if the scale isn't moving.
It's about feeling better overall, both physically and mentally. Now, we've talked a lot about the physical side of things, but what about the psychological side?
Right. That's where the psychiatrist's insights were so helpful. She really emphasized understanding our motivation, managing stress,
Yeah.
even appreciating our bodies as they are.
She talked about how motivation can be fleeting, so it's important to build those healthy habits.
Right. It's like creating a system.
Exactly. A system that supports you even on those tough days.
And remember that tidbit about it taking 4 to 6 weeks to form a habit?
Oh, yeah.
Consistency is key. It takes time and effort to rewire our brains.
It really does. And before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, think about this. We've covered a ton of information about weight loss.
We have.
But what resonated with you the most? What sparked your curiosity or maybe even challenged your assumptions?
It's pretty amazing, right, how much there is to learn about this whole journey.
For sure. It never ends, does it?
And speaking of learning, one of the sources had this idea that really stuck with me. Mindful eating? You heard of that?
Oh, yeah. It was that article on changing eating habits, wasn't it?
Yeah. They were all about slowing down, being present during meals. It's so easy to just, rush through them.
Oh, tell me about it, especially with our busy lives.
Right. Like we're barely even tasting our food half the time.
It's true.
They suggested only eating when you're truly hungry and stopping when you're satisfied, not stuffed.
Oh, that's good advice.
And get this, they even said to avoid distractions while eating, like no TV, no phones.
Wow, that's tough.
Right. But it's about really savoring each bite, paying attention to your body's signals.
It makes you realize how often we eat mindlessly, doesn't it?
Totally. Like scrolling through our phones, not even thinking about what we're eating. Oh, and along those lines, I really like their suggestion to find other things to do when you're not really hungry, but you want to eat.
Oh, like distractions from food?
Yeah. They said things like going for a walk, picking up a hobby,
Oh, I see.
even getting involved in your community. Finding healthier ways to deal with stress or boredom.
Instead of turning to food. Makes sense.
Right. It's about being proactive, finding joy in other things. And, speaking of finding support, one article suggested joining a support group. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. It can be so helpful to connect with people who get it,
Right.
who are going through the same thing.
Right. It creates that sense of community,
Definitely. And accountability, too.
Exactly. You're not alone. It reminded me of that YouTube doctor and what she said about the importance of support.
Oh, yeah, she was big on that.
Whether it's friends, family, a support group. Having people to lean on makes a big difference. Now, going back to the YouTube videos, there was this one piece of advice that really resonated with me. The doctor said, don't beat yourself up if you haven't met a goal yet.
Yeah, that's good.
She said, just pick yourself back up and start where you left off.
It's so important to hear that, isn't it? That self-compassion.
Totally. It's a good reminder that weight loss is a journey, not a destination. There are going to be ups and downs.
For sure. Twists and turns along the way.
It's about being kind to ourselves throughout the process. Recognizing that setbacks, they're normal, they're part of growth.
And remembering that you're not alone. There are healthcare professionals, support groups, even online communities that can help.
So true. So as we wrap up this deep dive into weight loss advice from doctors, what are some key takeaways? Well, we learned that weight loss is a holistic journey, right? It's not just about diet and exercise.
Right, it's about mental and emotional well-being too.
It's about finding an approach that's sustainable for you and realizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
We're all different.
Exactly. We were reminded to celebrate those non-scale victories and to be kind to ourselves even when we stumble. And, don't be afraid to ask for help.
There are people who want to see you succeed, who want to support you.
That's right. Well, that concludes our deep dive for today.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll catch you next time for another fascinating topic.